For joining. Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. We're very excited to launch the world's first science-based target setting guidance for the private equity sector. My name is Chen-Dan Yan, and I'm a research associate at the Science-Based Targets Initiative and the World Resources Institute. I'm the project lead, and I will be your host today. For today's 1-hour session, we will open with a joint welcome from the SBTi and our project partners, PRI and ICI. We will then go through the process we took to develop this guidance and highlights from the guidance. For the second half of our session, we are very excited to be joined by a panel of CEOs from 4 PE firms that had their targets approved by the SBTi using the guidance. I would also like to thank our funders for their financial support that made this project possible. So with that, I would like to welcome Nathan Fabian, Chief Responsible Investment Officer from the UN PRI, Nate Aden, Finance Sector Manager from the SBTi, Ema Palmer, Head of Responsible Investing at ICG and a co-founder of the ICI UK network, Alvar de Wolf, Head of ESG at Burgon Investments and co-chair of the ICI Net Zero and SBT Working Group at ICI, and Serge Younes, Head of Sustainability at Invest Industrial, who's also a co-chair of the ICI Net Zero and SBT Working Group. So Nathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chen-Dan. Hello, everyone. It's good to join you for this event. And if I may welcome you all to this launch of our private equity sector science-based targets guidance. Now, I'm sure it's clear to this audience that we're now in a world with clear and necessary climate goals. And these clear goals require all of us to set targets, to act, to ensure that our investment activities are contributing to realizing those goals and not undermining them. And of course, the implication of these goals and the targets we set is that we must understand the sustainability performance of our investees, and we must be prepared to use our influence as owners and allocators of capital to have a positive impact. This is what responsible investment means today. We need financial returns and we need the meeting of climate goals. And I can think of no better sector of the investment community to take up this challenge than our private equity colleagues. Now, PRI, who I work for, is delighted to support this initiative, as we do with all responsible investors who are serious about incorporating ESG. PRI provides the secretariat to the initiative, and we will support this initiative through our channels to our other signatories to increase the support and support those who are working already on these commitments that they're making. We're delighted to work with and partner with the SBTi, who are doing a fantastic job of helping us focus on what it really takes to meet the climate goals, because it is too easy to underestimate how much change is required. So to all of the early signatories, to the ICI, to those of you in the audience who may think of joining us in future, congratulations. We look forward to your future work and of course, delivering and following through on these very important commitments. Good luck to all for the launch event today.
Thank you, Nathan, Fabian, for those rousing introductory remarks. My name is Nate Aden, so Nathan followed by a Nate here. And I'm speaking on behalf of the Science-Based Targets Initiative. We are very pleased to be launching this PE guidance today. For those who aren't familiar with the Science-Based Targets Initiative, this is a collaboration between CDP, WWF, WRI, and the UN Global Compact. We launched back in 2015, and when we launched, we knew that the financial sector would play a key role in achieving climate stabilization that we're working towards. However, we didn't have a full framework and resources for financial institutions, and so we published a framework for financial institutions last October, and then for the past year, we've been building on that framework in collaboration with the private equity firms on the webinar today to build this private equity guidance. And we're very pleased to be launching it today. Private equity has unexpectedly turned out to be a very strong area of the financial sector. We didn't anticipate this when we started the work 4 years ago for the financial sector, but we've been very pleasantly surprised with leadership and uptake among the private equity firms. And so we're very happy to be celebrating the first private equity firms with approved targets here today, and also the other private equity firms that are in the pipeline. So we'll be hearing a lot more from these firms during this webinar. In terms of the broader initiative, we now have more than 2,100 commitments from companies and financial institutions all over the world. And we have more than 1,000 with approved SBTs, including some in this group today. So we're very pleased to be moving this forward and presenting the new guidance to all of you. With that, I will pass it to Eimer, who's the ICG Head of Responsible Investing, to further the program here. Eimer, all you.
Thank you, Nate. ICI is a group of private market investors that have collectively committed to reduce the carbon emissions of their portfolio companies and incorporate climate risk into investment decisions. We launched the ICI UK network last year with a handful of our peers, and it has since grown to 37 investors, representing over 330 billion euros AUM. Globally, ICI has over 129 members and represents almost $2 trillion AUM. The ICI network has many ongoing projects and initiatives, but we believe that the launch of the Science-Based Target private equity guidance today is a significant milestone for our industry in terms of decarbonizing investment portfolios. And we hope this will encourage other private equity firms to take note and to follow suit. I will now hand you over to Serge Younes from Invest Industrial, one of the co-chairs of the ICI Net Zero and SBT Working Group.
Thank you, Eimer. The ICI signatories are all working together and collaboratively to demystify the actions that are needed to tackle climate change in the private equity industry. We acknowledge that we are all at different stages of climate maturity, but in reality, we all share in the ambition to make meaningful action. This is the intent of the various working groups, namely the working group that's been working here with SBT, which is aptly called Net Zero and SBT. And between the UK and the French chapters, we have over 30 signatory members working together. Those work groups are a forum for private equity professionals to learn, share knowledge, and work together on this. It was clear for us from the beginning that there are some very large gaps in guidance on carbon footprinting, on carbon reduction, and on net zero that would apply to private equity. And as practitioners, we set about to work with the industry bodies to translate what are the existing guidance to the specificities of private equity. And this includes today's launch of the SBT guidance for private equity. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Alvar from Bregal, who co-chairs our working group in the UK, to talk about how we came about to support SBT.
Thank you, Serge. As a group of private equity funds, we recognize the need to collaborate on climate change. We already knew that SBTi is the main target setting and target validation approach for the corporate world, but the existing guidance did not really apply to private equity. So there was a great opportunity to collaborate with SBTi to develop something bespoke for our industry. So now, when our investors ask us how we align our portfolio with the 1.5 degrees pathway, we can give a clear answer. We can show progress. This standard launched today is a measurable, transparent, and consistent way of addressing climate change in private equity. We're proud to have contributed to this. Thank you. Back to you, Channa.
Great. Thanks so much for our speakers for the great remarks. And now let's turn our attention to the guidance. Let me first introduce our project team that worked very hard over the past 6 months to develop this guidance. Members from NCSIS, a global sustainability consultancy, were on secondment to the SBTi to support the guidance development. So Tim Clare is our project advisor, Miles Tatlock is our project manager, Jacob Schenker is a project coordinator, and Hannah Westlin is our project author. So the primary audience of this guidance are listed or unlisted PE firms or GPs that manage PE direct investments, private debt, secondaries, and fund of funds. So that said, the asset class specific guidance can also be applied to PE funds managed by other types of financial institutions. And our project goals are threefold. First, to provide guidance for PE firms to set targets on their operations and investment and lending portfolios in line with well below 2 degree or 1.5 degree climate scenarios. Second, we want it to be tailored to the unique business models and asset classes of PE firms and provide practical guidance for them to develop SBTs for their key asset classes. Third, to provide recommendations to help PE firms overcome their commonly faced barriers in target development. And with that, we aim to raise the ambition of the PE industry by defining and promoting best practice in science-based target setting and providing methods, criteria, guidance, and tools to reduce the barriers to adoption and implementation. And ultimately, this would lead to emissions reduction in the real economy. The guidance was developed through an inclusive, transparent, and multi-stakeholder process. We formed an expert advisor group, an EAG, with members of the ICI, GPs, LPs, consultancies, academia, and NGOs. From May to August this year, we developed the first draft with input from the project EAG and the SBTi finance team. From August to end of September, we shared the first draft for public consultation through an online survey, one-on-one feedback sessions, and reviews by multiple PE ESG working groups and industry associations in the US and Europe. 9 PE firms road tested the guidance and 7 submitted targets for an SBTi validation. Throughout October, we improved the guidance after numerous discussions with subject matter experts, the EAG, and the SBTi finance team, and based on feedback received in the public consultation. Of course, we're here today to celebrate the launch of our guidance and the approved targets and the commitments. So this week on the 9th and the 10th, Anthesis is also hosting an event at the Responsible Investment Forum about the guidance. In winter this year, we will announce dates for additional outreach and deep dive technical workshops. And we also expect to update the guidance annually to reflect the latest available climate science, target setting methods, and industry best practices. And now I'll walk you through a step-by-step process for a PE firm to set SBTs. In the first step, a PE firm defines its organizational boundary and consolidates its scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. A GP is required to serve as the reporting entity to consolidate its GH emissions from its operations in scope 1 and 2, and portfolio companies' emissions in all managed funds in scope 3 category 15. The second step is for the GP to determine the ambition of its scope 1 and 2 targets. The third step is for the GP to decide whether it would like to set optional targets under scope 3 categories 1 to 14, such as purchase goods and services and business travel. So these targets are optional, as we would like to ensure that the PE firms focus their efforts on their most material scope 3 category, category 15 investments, which now leads us to step 4. In this key step, a GP identifies all relevant asset classes that are determined as required by the SBTi. So you can see on this slide that PE direct investments are required, whereas private debt, fund of funds, and secondaries are optional in this version of the guidance. In step 5, a firm proceeds to use the relevant methods and develop targets on their required asset classes. We encourage GPs to go above and beyond and develop targets or follow our recommended actions on the optional asset classes. So for multi-strategy firms, following this guidance requires a comprehensive look at multiple asset classes. In step 6, a GP would follow a set of templates to develop clear and quantitative public target language, as well as a summary of strategies to achieve their scope 3 category 15 targets. After a GP's targets are approved by the SBTi, they are required to announce their targets and transparently report and track targets on an annual basis. And lastly, but most importantly, let the real work begin where GPs take actions to achieve its targets and drive emissions reduction in the real economy. So with that, I'll hand over to Tim to talk about the asset class methods.
Thanks very much, Shendon. hopefully you can all hear and see me now. The asset classes. The guidance applies to 6 asset classes, 4 within the private equity direct investment area, the largest by AUM being buyouts and growth capital. The asset classes were defined after extensive research and discussions with the expert advisory group and consultee feedback. There are 4 required asset classes and 2 optional asset classes, meaning if a PE firm wishes to align with an SBT, they must include the required asset classes if they have these strategies. Buyout and growth capital applies to the private equity firm's portfolio companies where there is a hold of greater than or equal to 25% of the shares and seats on the board. Venture capital applies to specific size and age conditions to draw the line at capturing portfolio companies that are too small or new. These are 15% shares, the company being 5 years old and having £10 million on its balance sheet. Asset classes that have been carved out to maximize the influence that private equity firms have across their investments. The guidance adopts the 3 existing methods from the FI guidance and importantly recommends the preferred method of choice in each case. The portfolio coverage approach is the preferred method for the largest asset class, buyout and growth. If we look at the portfolio company coverage for an example, the portfolio coverage approach is an engagement-based approach that can be best described as setting target of targets, whereby the private equity firm must have all their own portfolio companies set their own science-based targets by 2040, i.e. 100% coverage. The SBT the private equity firm is signing up to is then effectively a 5-year target, which is in line with the trajectory needed to meet 100% coverage by 2040, i.e. from 2020, that would see a 5% increase in coverage annually or 25% by 2025. The coverage relates to the selected metric, which can either be GHG emissions or a financial figure. In each case, the preferred choice is put forward, and the preferred choice is generally the presenting and use of GHG emissions. In the example we put forward here, you can quickly see that this organisation is investing £100 million in each investment. The example here points to the fact that in the first instance, the company is seeking to use its leverage with its portfolio companies to get them to set their own individual science-based target. In the first 2 cases, partly due to the time these companies have already been invested, they're unsuccessful. But with portfolio company 3 and then portfolio company 5 onwards, you can see that they are successful in encouraging those firms to set their own SBT. And as a consequence, they're continuing to build up their coverage over time, first hitting their 5-year target and then continuing as required. The advantages of this approach is it is requiring each individual portfolio company to set their own SBT, which is considered to be the most robust approach for private equity firms to adopt. Each portfolio company is then required to disclose the actions it will take to meet its individual targets. And once those organizations are ahead and confirming action, they must report on the real emissions savings they are making in the economy. If we move on. As alluded to earlier, following and using the guidance, there are now 7 private equity firms who have set their targets, and these have been approved. They are Astorg, Bregau, EQT, FSN, HG Capital, ICG, and Invest Industrial. And beyond these firms, there are also 7 other firms who have committed and are in the process of rolling out their targets. At that point, I will hand over to Nate.
Thanks very much, Tim, for those excellent slides. So one of the unique features of the Science-Based Targets Initiative is that we bring together both the climate science and the actual companies and financial institutions to link and actually have robust emission reduction targets. So we have been extremely fortunate in this project in particular to work with a leading group of private equity firms to make sure that this guidance is practical, but still robust and links with the climate science. So it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel today. As you can see, we have 4 CEOs here. So first we have Quentin Van Dusselaer from Bregal Investments. And then we have Benoit Durtest from ICG. We have Frode Strand-Nielsen from FSN and Andrea Bonomi from Invest Industrial, apologies. So now we will have a panel discussion with these distinguished CEOs. And I'll have the first question for Frode. And the question is, what do you see as private equity's unique role in reducing global greenhouse gas emissions and addressing our climate challenges? Frode?
Let's get my camera on here. Here we go. Thank you, Nate. First of all, let me thank Chendan, Nathan, Nate, Pete, Emar, Serge, and Alvar, and your respective organizations, PRI, ICI, and SBTi, for initiating and driving this incredibly important initiative. I would also like to thank my colleagues from my CEO colleagues here for prioritizing and allocating time and resources to make this collaboration possible and to get to where we are today. It's been incredibly inspiring to follow the progress you made over the last 6 months. What is PE's role in this? So far, as you alluded to earlier here, the net zero initiative have been largely aimed at publicly listed companies. But we have to remember that 50% of assets are owned in the private markets. So throwing privately owned companies into the mix with force is going to be required to get the world to net zero by 2050. I think the PE industry is in pole position to be a role model of how to achieve net zero. This is because if you believe McKinsey, we have a more effective governance model than public companies. We are simply better at driving change faster than other governance models. We are good at generating a sense of urgency and a burning platform required to drive change. And a burning platform we certainly have here. In my book, talking about net zero in 2050 does not generate a call for action. This is what Mark Carney calls the tragedy of horizons. We need to bring net zero up front and center. We need to talk about targets, not 30 years out, but 3 years out, and break those targets down into next year targets and send our portfolio companies on a journey where they deliver progress towards those targets on a monthly basis. This is the PE model. And that is what driving emissions reductions through science-based targets is all about. So our role, I think we can show the world that it is possible to get to net zero much quicker than currently assumed. And that will create massive ripple effects throughout not just the private equity industry, but throughout private markets and public markets. Thank you. Back to you, Nate.
Thank you, Frode. That's inspiring to hear from a PE firm. And indeed, that's similar to our thinking for the science-based targets more broadly, is that we're creating a platform to amplify your leadership and that this has large peer ripple effects. And we're already seeing it with so many private equity firms on board here immediately. So this is exciting time. The next question is for Benoit Durteste, the ICG CEO, and the question is one that we get a lot in the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is, this is obviously a voluntary initiative. And so the question is, what motivated ICG to participate and be a front runner within your sector?
Sure, thanks, Nate. Well, there are a number of reasons. Perhaps I should say that ICG has been in a unique position within our group here as the only alternative asset manager listed on the FTSE 100. And today we have about just over $65 billion in assets under management. And so we're acutely aware that we have tremendous responsibility, both as an investor and as a steward of shareholder and third-party LP capital. The breadth of our investment strategy and our geographic footprint, we're in 15 countries today, mean that we intersect with a very large and diverse group of stakeholders. And if our goal is to work for the benefit of all these stakeholders, from the pensioners invested in our funds to portfolio company employees, we need to be playing our role in society to push the ESG agenda forward. And that's a key reason for us to be part of this group. So I'm very proud to be part of this group and a front runner in our industry. ESG has been at the core of ICG's investment strategy for almost 15 years now. And we started working on setting science-based targets earlier this year and decided to embed this into our flagship fund, Europe 8, this past July, thereby underpinning the strength of our commitment. I believe that science-based targets not only play a critical role in curbing climate change, but importantly, they also present a hugely attractive commercial and value creation opportunity for our industry and therefore our clients. And I'll explain why. One, and that's particularly true with COP. The COP discussions underway, climate-related regulation is a very real and necessary evolution that we as investors need to be prepared for and actually potentially to contribute to. Two, I'm convinced that there is a correlation between adopting science-based targets, or at least working towards adopting science-based targets, and competitiveness. I chair our investment committees, and I can tell you that we are clearly seeing this within our own portfolios. And finally, I believe that the adoption and implementation of science-based target strengthens our credibility and influence across the stakeholder universe, not least with our investors, who will see the tangible value creation and the subsequent benefits that follow, such as the increased competitiveness that I was mentioning, strengthened reputation as well, and reduced financing costs. So you see, I mean, there are no lack of reasons to join this group and take action early.
Thank you, Benoit.
Sure.
Cogent business case there. Now I'll turn to Quentin van Dusselaer from Bregal, and a similar question for you is, can you tell us a bit more about your motivation for joining this esteemed group and how you see this fitting into your broader business case? I think you're still on mute. Sorry, Quentin.
I have maybe a little bit of a different take, and I'd like to start to acknowledge the people in the street of Glasgow, the next generation that is frustrated, and for good reason. And I think, let's face it, the finance sector, by its position as a central node of our economic system, has often been singled out as having the resources to participate in finding solutions to some of the social challenges we have, and has often come up empty, right? And so this negative view, we are seeing finance as some kind of puppeteers of the economic system with not enough soul, is certainly something that is out there, and I think that we should confront and acknowledge. And so there's more to do, but I also think we need radical improvement, and not only because where we are, but also because of the time pressure. So, and in fact, actually, our sector probably even more so than others, because we do operate a model whereby we actually own and ultimately directly control our investment and our operation. So that's not necessarily the case for banks. That's not necessarily the case for insurance company or traditional asset manager. So they have to deal with something else. They have to deal with either pressure, either not doing something, not partner. No, we actually own the mean of productions, and as such, we have an immediate and direct line of sight in changing the way we produce goods and services to contribute to a net zero target and contribute to keep the temperature within the 1.5 degree increase. So really, I think there's no excuse, and it's not about politics. It's about what we can do and execute it. So that's also why I think as a sector, we in some way have at least as much responsibility as other sector in the financial industry. And how does it manifest itself? Well, at Bregal, I would say all the stakeholders, starting with our founders, the Brennick-Meyer family, our growing numbers of limited partners who have entrusted their capital to us, but also all my Bregal colleagues. We've taken this seriously and at heart. And I think what we realize also, I don't think solution and energy is business as usual. And I hear the argument that if you do good, you're going to do well. But I think we're a bit in a crunch, and I think there's a qualitative difference that we have to apply to the problem. And if you think about markets, and markets have unleashed incredible economic growth in the last 150 years with many benefits, but also markets are regulator of social dynamic, and sometimes poor regulator, they're left alone. So I think we look forward to the legal and improvement and just to change the framework so that it influences the industry. But this said, the market will be too slow, and we've seen they've been too slow. So we need to do something different. There's not an invisible hand who's going to help us here, and it's not going to be the law, because the politicians are discussing and they make laws and they're going to help us, constrain us a little bit, but they seem to have a tough time to find a consensus. Especially in a world where multilateralism seems to be on the decrease. So we have a few examples of the things that we've been doing. We have a sustainable fund that actually has a 1% interest rate, which is basically off market, just to make sure that people don't make a trade-off between capital and do the right thing. But by and large, our efforts are kind of valiant and gallant, and but they're bound to be too little too late if we're by ourselves. And so we need to draw the whole industry. And I think that's why specifically a science-based initiatives with measurable goals and concrete steps fits what we try to do. We are an industry that works on hard data. We are an industry almost obsessed on our operation. We're getting monthly, if not weekly, report about what's going on in our enterprise. And so why not doing the same for sustainability? Why not establishing something that is credible, that is scientific, that we can measure, that is transparent? And I think I actually believe that this is a good complement to our culture. And I think the fact that actually those criteria have been established in collaboration with very distinguished nonprofit organizations that are not motivated by financial goals is actually exactly what we need, and exactly the medicine that we need. And so having found that, we really believe that being able to lead is a privilege. And hopefully we're going to be able to get others to rally around. And I think, as Alvaro said, problem of global warming is a collective problem. And having, a first group of 7 or 8 is great, but I think we really need 50, we need 100. I also, you see from my background, I'm in New York, but I think this for the moment, it seems to be more of a European enterprise. And I think we need to get our colleagues in the United States also to warm up to the idea. And I know that when they do, they actually act quickly and efficiently. So I'm very hopeful about that.
Great. Thank you very much, Quentin. Inspiring remarks there. So now we'll pass the question to Andrea Bonomi from Invest Industrial, but I'll change the question a bit so we don't have too much repetition here. So if we zoom out a little bit, what do you think it is about private equity that merits a dedicated SBT guidance? And can you talk a little bit about your sector more broadly?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Nat. Well, I mean, private equity, we had two guidances which were available to us. One, the financial sector guidance, and second, the corporate guidance. A private equity firm falls somewhere in between these two. So none of the guidance was, if you want, acceptable, perfectly fitted our industry. If you don't have a guidance that fit your industry, it's difficult to marshal everybody to behind a drive, and therefore the effectiveness of this work would not have been as great. And the reason we need our own guidance is the companies we invest in are very different, and are at different stages of their development. So the private equity industry invests from venture capital all the way to large buyouts, with mid-market companies being the bulk of the investment scenario. These companies are at different points on their journey to building their ESG practice, and especially they are practically nowhere in their science-based targets. So very, very important that we had our own guidelines that we could follow. We have to require them to do two types of skills very quickly, which is, if you want, hard skills and soft skills. The hard skills is to measure and develop their processes so that they can address their overall ESG issue and the science-based targets. The soft skills is to make sure that we have changed the culture and that we've embedded within these companies the culture that will allow them to continue on this journey in becoming better companies, which is our goal as an industry, but it is also their goal, and that should be their goal as businesses, so that what we leave is everlasting, and it participates in this global phenomenon. The second point of having our own guidance is the kind of investors we are. Most of us manage multiple funds with companies that are at different moments of their entry into these funds. I mean, the holding periods are between 1 and 10 years. There are some companies which are just starting their journeys, some companies which have already developed quite a bit of what is required to have science-based targets. But basically, there are also companies that start from scratch. So this is not something that, without having our own dedicated financial sector guidance or corporate guidance, so having our own private equity guidance, we will be able to do. And if you want, finally, the most important thing is that by showing this leadership, it will help everybody else jump into the bandwagon and for us to be more effective.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you, Nate.
So this is, I think, very enlightening for many people in the climate community, because as you referred to, finance doesn't always get a good name in the sort of climate discussion, and it's refreshing to hear some leadership and see these firms stepping forward. So I think this is a good message, and one that we hope to build on. One question that we get is, as you mentioned, it's very competitive. So what brought you forward to collaborate in this? And I'll ask this of Quentin from Bregal. And in the spirit of collaboration, I'll ask each of you to try to limit your answer to 3 minutes so that you'll all have time to speak, and we'll be able to wind it up in the end. So Quentin, over to you.
Well, I do think that of all the ill on the planet, climate is probably the one that is the most global. And obviously, we know gas, air in particular, goes across boundaries. So it is not a place for free riding, right? So that we know, just as a concept, anybody talk about climate, if they think they can go on alone, that won't work almost by definition. And so having a pocket of activism will be helpful, one country, one industry, but unless everybody participates, we're not going to get where we need to go. And it's a bit unfortunately, it happened at the time of history where solidaristic policies and international corporations seem to be heading in the wrong direction. But so here we are trying to do our small contribution, and we are a competitive industry, but we do sometimes partner on investments, and also importantly, we share the same limited partner often. I mean, those who entrust their capital to us are the same, and they might be an NFS Capital, or they might be an Invest Industrial. And so for them, it is important that they get also a sense and a measurable idea about where the progress I made from different funds, because they're very concerned about it and they want to have an ability to measure. And I want to single out pension funds in particular that are driven by their pensioner and by the public, and they seem to be at the forefront of this, and obviously some funds more than other. In addition, like many of these initiatives, and you see it at the grand scale between countries, there's a nudging process going on. One country does it because the other does, and they do this because of reputation, they do it because they don't want to be left behind, or sometimes genuinely because they want to get educated and they want to change their opinion and move forwards from the others. And I think we're in a bit in a similar situation. Hopefully this effort nudge the others about doing something. And what about, how about this nudge? I hear people talk about 2040 and 2050. And for me, the nudge should be 2030, because we own our investment for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. And saying that you have a target of 2050 is like saying, I don't need to do anything for 10 years. And I'm gonna start next year. So I think the first nudge to our industry is that come along, but also tighten your targets, because hearing money manager talk about 2050 seems to be a lifetime of not having to do so much and with not urgency. And I don't think that's going to meet the target.
Thank you. And again, this echoes the SBT initiative. What we were hearing back in 2015 with the passage of the Paris Agreement was that there was a lot of enthusiasm for 2050 commitments, but there wasn't much near-term action, and there wasn't any sort of sense of accountability or how they were going to get there. And so that was, in fact, one reason we started the SBT initiative, was to provide a near-term pathway to get to these 2050 outcomes that we're all agreeing on. So that's very consistent. Appreciate the points on shared responsibility, but also sharing LPs and some collaboration here as well as competition. I think that's essential to have both sides of that coin. So the next question, I'll turn to Andrea from Invest Industrial, and this is more oriented towards engagement. And the question is sort of, how you work with the portfolio companies, and how you find this to actually achieve real emission reductions in the real economy.
Yes, so it's not so much what we as a firm do. If you want to achieve, if you want to be aligned with the 1.5 degrees pathway, if you want, we need to rope in all our investee companies as fast as possible. Invest Industrial has been carbon neutral for about almost 15 years, but if you look at our carbon footprint, it's 23,000 tons. If you look, including our investment in the funds, if you look at our investee companies, it's 3.8 million tons a year. So it's not what we as a firm believe in, is how effective we are in getting them to sign up to a path, a journey which is be effective, and then how we as a community, as an investment community, do overall, because obviously we have to multiply this for every company in other people's portfolio. So it is essential that we work with the investee companies. And as I said before, these investee companies, some of them are ready, some of them are not ready, some of them are just starting to believe. So the culture needs to be changed, and by changing their culture, you change the culture of their suppliers, you change the culture of all the stakeholders around the company, and we are obviously more effective because of that. But why do I mention this? I mean, obviously, we also have another stakeholder, which is the pension funds, the endowments that give us our capital to do our work, and they share this vision. And what they share this vision, they're also building value for their investors. So the companies have to understand that coming in this journey with us creates value, creates safety, creates sustainable return for us as investors and for the industry overall. So it is essential that all the companies at the end share this culture and step change in creating a decarbonized economy.
Great, thank you, Andrea. I think the cultural aspect is certainly a strong one, and we're seeing science-based targets become a bit of a norm among some sectors and geographies, where it's becoming an expectation for any sense of climate leadership. And I think Quentin, you alluded to this lightly before in terms of the need for more US uptake. So I think this is something that we can think about. And the next question is for Frode from FSN. The question is, how can we scale this and make it more of a common practice across your sector, across private equity firms, to set science-based targets? How do we catalyze this excellent leadership from all of your firms to get the rest of the firms to follow suit?
Yeah, I think Nate, we have an industry which is populated by highly energized, ambitious, and competitive people and firms. That's who we are. Now, we compare fiercely for talent, for deals, for the favor of the LP community. But this is an issue, which is a global issue, where there's no need to compete. I think, achieving net zero through science-based targets is a vision we must achieve by working together. We're all going to be facing the same hurdles, the same barriers for implementing this in our portfolio companies. And we would love to create for us, collaborative for us, where we share best practices, where we share the issues we're dealing with, because we think our unified efforts here are much more impactful than the sum of the individual efforts. And I'm really happy to hear that everybody is talking about speed. 250 is way out there. It doesn't generate any call for action. And I think what we're really good at as owners of businesses is really accelerating the speed of change in our country. We only have 5 years, so we're pretty good at this. And science-based targets is music to our ears, because they're very quantified targets, and we drive our companies towards meeting targets. And very important, as Andrea mentioned, I say the hard stuff is the soft stuff. You can't just have the targets. You also need to drive a change in culture at the same time. So getting those two to work together, I think we will be quite successful in doing this. Now, 4, 5, 6 firms, that's not enough. We have to multiply. So what we plan to do is to bring this initiative to the venture capital associations in the Nordic area, and hopefully together with you, some of the DACH area, which we cover, and get a process going where we bring in all the private equity firms so that we can be evangelists here and bring everybody along on this very important mission. I think climate threat is real, and it's already upon us. But I think if we deal with this collectively and collaboratively as an industry, the way to net zero, we can reap massive benefits in terms of the investment opportunity that lies ahead of us in the green transition. And through that, we'll get a larger economy, and I think we'll get a more stable and pollution-free society in the future. So we do have a very important role here to play in the private markets to make this happen, and make it happen much quicker than the 240, 250 timeline we're talking about.
Thank you, Frode. I think the sense of urgency is coming across consistently from all of you. So that's good and appropriate, since we're having this webinar during COP, and these are very timely discussions. So I think another question here is for Benoit from ICG, and the question is, what we can do, sort of stepping back here a little bit, to again really try to achieve those emission reductions in the real economy and move closer to net zero, which is our goal here for climate stabilization.
Sure, Nate. Well, I mean, obviously, as an industry, well, first of all, as this group, and then as an industry, we clearly need to do more. This is just a first step. as you've heard, today, this group has gone, above and beyond the standard, by committing to 2030 science-based targets and net zero by 2040. That's 10 years ahead of the industry for both targets. But I think more can be done. Those science-based targets have been created by the industry with the specifics of the industry in mind, and so we need to bring on others to follow suit and develop and set their own ambitious science-based targets and act now to decarbonize their investment portfolios. And I'm convinced this will happen, as this, takes shape and grows in strength. I think it is going to become more and more difficult for market participants not to take part. So what we're doing here is the starting point of something that I think will gain in strength and speed. I think the other thing that we should mention is that we formed this collective because the relevant regulation currently doesn't exist for our industry, but we also need to be mindful of the fact that the scale of the challenge dwarfs the sum of our combined ambition, and so we do need to policymakers to assist with regulation, and to the extent we can as a group is influence that, so to support ambitious decarbonization plans to help us achieve our goal, as well as something that's important and perhaps not so easy to do, but to try to create a level playing field. The other thing I think that's quite important is for us as leaders is to listen to the younger up and coming generation in our respective firms, because they have very strong ideas and very good ideas on how to reach net zero. Some of them are even talking about negative in a foreseeable future, and not just back-ended in decades. So I think as a group, I think we can be very proud of what we've achieved, but there's clearly a long way to go, and our fundamental duty of care requires us to continue to work together to reduce emissions across our investment portfolio, but also to improve reporting. I think I've heard it from a number of the speakers. We are a result-driven industry after all, and so as we keep improving our own reporting, but also reporting for the industry, I think this will help, and to keep coming up with new ideas and with goals that are ever more ambitious to bring forward this net zero target date.
Thank you, Benoit. I think it's that was a great answer, and I think one of your points there about the staff in your organizations is one that we hear consistently across the SBT initiative, that this is good for employee retention, people believe in what they're working on, and it's the right thing to do. So it's definitely an added purpose here and benefit. So I want to step back now. Each of you has had sort of a question guided to you, and so now one to the four of you is, the private equity space is unique as you've described it in terms of your holdings and the role of private finance. Do you have any advice for the rest of the financial sector in terms of banks and investors and other asset managers in terms of how they can accelerate on this process and learn from your experience with target setting so far? So I'll start with Frode, and then we'll go around to each of you to just give you an opportunity to provide a brief answer, any advice for the rest of the financial sector here.
Yeah, I think you need to focus on scope 3. You need to set your expectations as a bank or as an asset owner. Set your expectation. What is your expectations on this, and set aggressive, ambitious targets to be reached sooner rather than later, so that your lenders or your investee companies, that they get a very clear message. I mean, that's coming through very clearly in the GFANS initiative, and I think that's really going to have an impact. And I think we should expect the same from the financial institutions that invest in us and that lend us money. Throw the gauntlet.
Thank you for throwing down the gauntlet. I appreciate it. Quentin? Sorry, Quentin, you're muted.
I have an answer along the same line. I think, setting your target is definitely the number one thing to do, and then realizing that you definitely have a lot of means and resources to put pressure and eventually, to shift your business model, to change partners that you deal business with and influence. And certainly for us, the sector is the closest to us as all the asset manager, all those who manage the cumulative savings of our population, and they come to us to manage. And I think, it's a welcome pressure from them also on the private equity industry to require and demand standards. And I think often their own constituents are behind that. I talked about some of our LP, but that's definitely a place where they should wield their power, which is, they are clients, and for us, it's very important to listen to them.
Thank you, Quentin. And Benoit?
Yeah, sure. Well, listen, I mean, obviously the banks wield tremendous influence, so that's, there's no doubt that they can be a strong lever. I'm optimistic though. I think the banks are moving pretty quickly, but to some extent they need to be helped, because it's quite difficult. I mean, given the breadth of their activity, is quite difficult to be able to point to how to practically enact something that that goes in the right direction. And interestingly, I think what we are doing here by setting science-based targets, you're setting a standard, and that's very helpful for the banks, because they can use this as a basis for which to decide to lend or not lend, or maybe adjust the price of their financing, which is a very good way of influencing. And we are seeing that starting to come into place, where you're seeing ESG-linked commitment facilities. For instance, we have a few that start to get linked directly to these science-based targets. I think that's a great way of for the banks to use the huge influence that they can have.
Indeed, we see new product development as a large area of lots of potential here. Thanks, Benoit. And to you, Andrea.
I think everybody in the finance industry has an opportunity to lead this change. This is, if you remember the last crisis, finance was pointed as one of the issues. This is the first time finance and all of us are leading the solution. So it is our opportunity all together. As a world, we're late on doing this. So somebody has to lead, and finance has an opportunity to be super effective very quickly and set common standards across all our respective industries and achieve the results that the world requires. So this is a great opportunity for us to lead. And we shouldn't miss it.
Indeed, a good final remark here from our leading CEOs here. So I want to thank you once again for your time and for joining this launch webinar today. Your leadership is very important to us, and will catalyze greater action. So thanks again, and I will pass it back to my colleague, Chandan.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for CEOs and Nate for the very inspiring panel discussion. And thanks everybody for joining and engaging with us today. I would strongly encourage you to check out our guidance, and for all the PE firms in the audience to consider committing to the SBTi today. So thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.